Major League Baseball came to London this past weekend, took over Trafalgar Square in Stratford, so I'll talk you through my unique experience of the fantastic weekend. Whilst back in the States, the Mets are still Metsing it up after another embarrassing defeat. At this point, they're basically the Tottenham Hotspur of Major League Baseball. With all that coming up, let's talk baseball. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be listening to this. This is Let's Talk Baseball, the baseball podcast with a slightly British edge to it. I'm your host, Tom Scholes, and for the next 30 minutes or so, please join me as I ramble on about what we saw this weekend in London with the MLB London Series and the state of the New York Mets, who have decided yet again to implode when just when you thought it couldn't get any worse for the Mets, and just when you thought it couldn't get any lower, what have they gone and done? They've gone and lost again, this time to the Milwaukee Brewers, just as they start another series against them. They've dropped the first game of 4. What a time to be a Mets fan. However, let's jump back in time ever so slightly to this past weekend in Stratford at the London Stadium in central London. Well, East London mainly. It's not really central London, but we'll just call it the City of London for now. The Chicago Cubs and the St. Louis Cardinals came over and played out a 2-game series, which, I'll hold my hands up and admit that I wasn't able to attend both games. However, I did watch them intently on the BBC broadcast of it, and I have a lot of positive things to say about that, actually. But my unique experience of this comes from the Friday session with the Chicago Cubs batting practice and St. Louis Cardinals batting practice on the Friday from around 1 PM to about 4 PM. I was there with TalkSport. For those that are maybe listening to this and don't know, I do work for TalkSport as a social media producer, editor, all the good bits that come along with social media. And we had a live show from the London Stadium in one of the boxes to promote the game. And the plan that we had was to interview as many people as we could about the game, about stuff that interests people, is like stuff like the food. So we spoke to the chefs who made the giant boomstick hot dog and the boomstick nachos, which we delved into both. I'll give my opinion on them. Not too glowing, I would say, but we'll get onto that in a minute. However, the best part of the day came when we were waiting for, can't remember who it was, we were waiting for someone to turn up, and I said to the producer, I said, look, have we got anything coming up for this? And they just went, we got a couple of, we were taking live races from Royal Ascot, and we were going into the feed from there, so there wasn't really much for us to do in terms of our show. However, we looked on our passes, our media passes for the Friday, and it said field access. So I've been in this situation before where we've had field access on our pass, but we haven't had the right number or letter on there. So it was a bit restricted to what we can do, and ultimately when it says field pass, most of the time it doesn't mean field pass. That being said, we chanced our arm, me and one of the other producers, and we went to the security and the helper teams that were kicking about the stadium on the day, and we said, how do you get field access? We've got field access, how do you get down there? And I don't know whether the guy who helped us, really nice bloke, didn't know his name, but I don't know if the guy that helped us with that didn't know that we weren't part of the Chicago Cubs organization, because where they showed us down and into the field area was through the Chicago Cubs like equipment area and changing rooms and physio rooms, and it was labelled with like Cubs stuff, and we come out of the little tunnel area, and it's just wall to wall Cubs, and it was in the Cubs dugout. And as we turned the corner, we had to just as you get onto the final pathway into the dugout. There was a security guard there that had to scan your passes to make sure that you did actually have required field access. And this, always gets you nervous because you're thinking, it says field access, but are we going to get our barcode scanned? Is it going to come out the right way? And it did come out. Thankfully, it did the ding noise, and the green light showed up. We were all good to go. And just as we set foot onto the final kind of like runway of the supposed walkway, heading into the dugout and onto the field, we walked past Cody Bellinger, one of the nicest guys in sport that I've ever come across. This is a guy that he's a World Series champion. He's an All-Star. He was the National League MVP. I have got the stats up. The National League MVP in 2019. He was NL Rookie of the Year in 2017. He's a fantastic player. I still think he is a fantastic player. But one of the things, to be able to have just a stop at a little bit of a chat. Afternoon, Cody. How are you doing? How you finding London? He's really pleasant. Coming in, I think he was changing his bat over or changing his shoes over or whatever. But genuinely a really nice guy. An outstandingly nice guy who, he didn't need to say hello, he didn't need to have a chat with us, but he did. And he was more than happy to do the whole, London's great, I have not seen too much of it so far, but, looking forward to all that kind of stuff. And what I was excited about was once we finished chatting with Mr. Bellinger, we turned the corner and straight ahead was the dugout full of Cubs players, Cubs staff. There was McLaren racing staff there. I used to go to university with the photographer there, so I was I was happy to see him and all of that kind of thing. We had a nice little chat and spoke to Lando Norris, who I'm led to believe, I'm not an F1 fan, but I'm led to believe he's quite a talented Formula One racing driver. There was a McLaren car that was on the field, and it was quite surreal to be at the same level as these guys who you watch on television, you consume all the media about them, and they're there just playing keepy-uppies with West Ham ambassadors Carlton Cole and James Collins. It's weird, and it was also in my job we have the reminder that not every athlete is every athlete is a human. And I know that sounds silly to say, however, one thing that I think sometimes gets forgotten about when they're talking about sport is that they are people. They are humans. They are just like you and I. They aren't superheroes. As much as we laud them as being superheroes and super talented, given their abilities and what they produce in their respective fields, they still think and feel the same way that a majority of the world do. But to see, I think as well, it's something I've experienced when I've done the NFL with TalkSport as well, is that you don't expect to see these people in your day-to-day job. And I know it isn't, going to the Super Bowl and doing media stuff for the NFL and doing media stuff for Major League Baseball is not a day-to-day job. But when you have so much distance separating you, you don't expect to ever come across these people. You don't ever expect to be in situations that you find yourselves in. And, speaking to Cody Bellinger in a tunnel at the London Stadium as he's doing batting practice for the Chicago Cubs. If you'd have told me that a couple of years ago, I wouldn't have believed you. Would I have shook the hands of Dylan Carlson? No, I wouldn't have believed you. And another thing that I wanted to point out that I didn't quite realise is just how big these people are. They are massive. Like, I'm gonna have to get the stats up. Where was it? Dylan Carlson. So I'm listed as 6 foot, right? Dylan Carlson is 6'2" on Baseball Reference. I'm telling you now, no, he's not. Simply because the bloke is a giant. He is a big boy, right? Adam Wainwright, massive bloke. Mike Napoli was there behind the batting cage with his Arsenal top on that said Napoli won. And if it wasn't batting practice, I would have gone over to him and been like, why have you got an Arsenal shirt? You're in the West Ham stadium. Why have you not got a West Ham shirt? Why have you not got this shirt? Blah, 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 everything like that. But they were so focused. Him, David Ross, and the rest of the coaching staff were so focused that, I eventually nodded and said hello and good afternoon to David Ross, which again was a pleasant experience, even however fleeting it may be. But also David Ross was an absolute unit of a man. What does he come down as? I mean, where is he? David Ross. Again, he comes down as 6'2". You know what? I'm not surprised by that, because he was a unit of a man, built like a wardrobe, but also very pleasant, very serious, and he took his role very seriously, naturally, of course. But just a really nice guy, and I think this is another thing that that stood out from when we were speaking to the respective people, and when I was talking to my friend from university who works for McLaren and Lando Norris, Ian Happ finished his practice and just came up into the little group we were in. And you kick into the media work mode and you start taking pictures, and there's a photo on my Twitter of it. It was on the TalkSport Instagram page as well. But just to be there as a Formula One driver and Ian Happ, just standing face to face, having a nice conversation, and you're in the middle of it, or just off the middle of it, is surreal. But what I've found surprising out of everything, and I don't know if I should find it surprising given the seasons they've had respectively, but the vibe of the Chicago Cubs team was so much better than the St. Louis Cardinals team. When the cards came out, they were very serious. They were very, let's just get the job done and let's get out of here. Not in a we don't want to be here kind of way. They were buzzing to see the McLaren car. They were buzzing to see the McLaren team. They were happy to chat to people, of course. They weren't like brushing people off, but you spend enough time around athletes, and we've been to practices with. We did the Pro Bowl practice in Las Vegas was a year ago, and some players loved it. Some players were living it up. Some players not as much. The Cubs players, the vibe I got from them was they loved it. They loved being in London. They loved being in that situation. The weather was great. They were interacting with fans. They were interacting with the media a lot more than the Cardinals players were. And I just think, I was sat there watching the Saturday game, and it's easy to say it when the game is over and when the game's done. But I wasn't surprised it played out the way it did, because I didn't think the Cardinals were in the position they wanted to be in terms of they just didn't look. I don't know if happy is the way to put it. But they just didn't look like a team, I think was what was going through my mind. They had good players, but they gave off vibes of a team that was struggling very badly and didn't quite know what to do to address it. Now, I'm not a psychologist, so I'm not going to pretend to be one, but just going off the vibes, it wasn't the kind of thing that you expected to see, especially when, I've done NFL London practices before, and you can get that vibe from a couple of players where, they're not. It's it's more of a chore than anything else. Whereas for the Cubs players, they definitely seemed like they loved it more. But it was a great experience. It was a great day. And what I was most impressed with was the turnout from the fans. Across all 3 days, because I'm including the Friday in this as well. Because I got there, so I left mine at around 9:30 a.m. Got into London, had to do a few bits and pieces, and got to Stratford, which is where the London Stadium is, around 11:20 a.m. At 11:20 a.m, bearing in mind that the doors and the batting practice didn't start for another hour and a half, there were fans kicking around. There were. You saw Cubs shirts, you saw Met shirts, Cardinals shirts, Philly shirts. You saw loads of bits that were like, okay, these are here for the day. They've parked themselves in the stadium. They're going to enjoy themselves afterwards, and it was great. It was great in that regard. And you saw it over the weekend as well. Was it a sellout? I don't think it was. I'm going to have to double check, but I don't think it was. 1 second. According to ESPN, it was. The Saturday game was a sellout of 54,662, which isn't strictly a sellout for the London Stadium. However, when there's sections cut off and everything like that, you take it, and you take it and you go with it. What I'm impressed with is how, even despite the ridiculous pricing that Major League Baseball put onto it, it's still got a lot of fans out into the ground. And that's something they need to improve for next year. Of course, MLB Commissioner Rob Manfred, he announced on the Friday, just as we were going on air, that 2024 will be the Phillies and the Mets. I can't wait for that already. And we'll touch upon the Mets in a minute. But one thing that Major League Baseball, or whoever runs the ticketing prices at these events, needs to do, they just need to lower the prices so much. Because it was... the lowest price ticket that I could find heading into the event was £54 for an adult, which isn't. It's on the face of it doesn't sound awful, but bear this in mind: if you were trying to get into baseball, if you'd seen this advertised on television, good lord, did they try to push this on television? You might have looked at it and thought, you know what, I'll give this a go. This doesn't look too bad. I'm not doing anything that weekend. I don't live too far away. I might take my kids out for the day, go out with our mates, that kind of thing. And then you look on there and you think, £54? That doesn't include food. That doesn't include travel. You might end up looking at it and thinking, you know what, I don't think I'm all that interested. I don't think I'm that keen, because maybe you just can't justify it. And if you were an individual that turned around and did that, wouldn't have blamed you in an instant, because that's what happened with me. I couldn't get the time off work regardless, but if I could, I would have looked at that and gone, I don't know if I want to I don't know if that's the kind of money that you can put forward for 2 days, plus, £30 train tickets, plus food. You're spending $100 minimum, and that's for the basic. That's for the basic tickets. And it's like, I think the Sunday, if you were to watch on the television, there was empty seats. Now, there could be one of two things. There could be people that bought tickets and just didn't go. There could be, it was a very hot day on Sunday, and there was very little shade. Very little shade in the stands for the fans. So I wouldn't be surprised if they were all on the concourse, having a drink, having some food, and watching it from there. But it's just a bit too expensive, I think. Like, I know it's ridiculous to kind of look at an event in London and think, it's too expensive. But this isn't Beyonce, where you know what you're going to get, and she has a legion of fans in this country anyway. Or, a Tottenham Hotspur match, where, barring the result, you've got fans that know what they're going to get. They've got their team coming up. They're going to get 90 minutes of action. And if they weren't watching in the ground, they'd probably find a way to listen to it on the radio or watch it on television. But when you're trying to grow the game, you can't be doing this. You can't be spending £54, or charging £54 rather, on distant view seats. You need to do better with that. The Trafalgar Square event was free. All you had to do was sign up with a QR code. That is ideal, because it was packed when I ended up getting there around 6:30 p.m. Once I've dropped bits off at our studio, I got there around 6:30 p.m. and it was suitably busy. Not crammed, but busy enough that the queues for the shops and the custom Topps card and having to go on the baseball machines and the batting machines and the pitching machines were massive. That's ideal. Again, I don't know. I don't want to discuss the pricing for food too much or drinks too much or anything like that, because I don't know if that is a Major League Baseball thing or the suppliers of the food, because that's a very different conversation to be had regarding, in-stadium food and in-stadium drink and everything along those lines. We had some, like I said earlier, we had some of the food and they were quite good, but would I pay the money for it? I don't know. By all accounts, the atmosphere on the days were great. Nathan Lyon and Jimmy Anderson, Australia's Nathan Lyon and England's Jimmy Anderson threw the first pitches on the Saturday, in conjunction with the Ashes, of course, which is a crossover that makes so much sense. I don't mean that in a sarcastic way. Legitimately, that doesn't make a ton of sense. And people were happy to be there, And I think as well, what the most refreshing thing is that when you go to football games, like Premier League games, or lower down the football pyramid here in England, you're not too far away from aggression and anger and volatile words. And speaking to people that went to these games, and certainly from my own experience on the Friday, was that people were just so happy to be there and to see, we're used to staying up into the wee hours to watch these teams, especially if you're like a West Coast fan. So to be able to come into your own backyard and see if you're a Cubs fan in London and you're able to take a tube that's like 20 minutes into Stratford, plus a 1,000,000-mile walk from Stratford Tube Station to the London Stadium, it's worth it, because you get to see your team in action without having to leave your city. That's amazing. And I think this is what people were so happy about. It was enjoyable. Again, this is speaking from people that have been. Their verdict was it was enjoyable for the fans of the game, who are already fans of the game, who can watch it in peace, but also friendly enough that families can enjoy it and not have to worry about nonsense kicking off. When you judge it in comparison to the first series back in 2019, I think I don't know if this is more of a success, but I think it's... My opinion on it is, it could easily have died a death, figuratively speaking, due to the fact it wasn't the Yankees and the Red Sox. The St. Louis Cardinals and the Chicago Cubs are big names within baseball, but outside of the baseball world in the United States of America, the Chicago Cubs are more well known, but in a different way. You can name ex-Yankee players, you might be able to name ex-Red Sox players, but how many Cubs players can you name? And I think that's the difference in the appeal of the two. That being said, the fact that it was a sold-out crowd on the Saturday and people were enjoying themselves indicates that there is an interest, thankfully, that people are willing to go when they don't know all that much about it. And I think that is... They could easily have come back and people have gone, I'm not bothered about this. I'm not. The first time was 4 years ago. A lot's happened since then. But they came back and people loved it. But if growing the game is the way to go, and that is really what this is all about, and then they've got to look at new ways to broaden their horizons. Again, the pricing for the tickets, if that is a Major League Baseball issue, then they need to address that immediately, because yes, it may cost a lot to bring teams over here. The point of these series are to bring attention and fans to your team. So whilst they may not, if you, let's say for argument's sake, you charge £20 for a decent ticket, yes, you might lose out on a lot of money in terms of ticket sales, but you might make up for that in shirt sales, in MLB TV subscriptions, in, if someone wants to buy next year a Mets jersey from your website, or a Phillies jersey, or anything along those lines, you'll make that money up because you have the fans there. Ultimately, what this comes down to is the league having to solve a problem that they have been very poor with, not just over here, but in America as well, is growing the game to a new audience. There are ways to do this. They just need to figure it out. Hopefully they can figure it out in time for next year. Hopefully, and this is my hope for it, by the time the World Series is over, they've got plans for the London Series in terms of what they want to do to promote it. They had television adverts running, but you couldn't tell who the Cubs players were. You didn't know who Dansby Swanson was based off of that advert alone. You might do now when you come away from it. You might know who Ian Happ is now when you've been to the game, you've watched the game, you've listened to the game, or anything like that. But you didn't know based off of that. You need to market your players, especially with the teams that are coming up next year. There's a great opportunity to do that with a lot of them stars, and there's far more star power coming next year than there was this year. It's just a case of doing the right thing and promoting them in the right way. Send them on television. Send them to the world's biggest sports radio station based outside of London Bridge Station in the Shard, whoever that may be. And just give people reasons to care about them individually. The Mets are coming, so you get a New York audience, and the Phillies are huge. This is going to be a big event next year. And there are things that they need to do differently, but I'm confident they can rectify them, even if some people might not be as confident as I am. Well, thank you for listening to this. I think it's the second episode now of Let's Talk Baseball. I've enjoyed rambling on for the past 45 minutes about, my experience at the MLB London game event on Friday, watching the game on BBC. I thought they broadcasted the game really well in a way that, didn't alienate knowledgeable hardcore fans, but also didn't alienate non-fans who may be tuning in for the first time. I think, there's a long way to go for Major League Baseball to be a huge hit in this country, but it's taking the right steps, slowly but surely. Thank you for listening. Have a good day, and tune in next time to Let's Talk Baseball.